Let's say you knit a sweater that is 40 inches at the bust. How would that fit on a person? Well, let's say you have a 38-inch bust. That would give you 2 inches of positive ease, which is a classic fit. Let's say your bust is 32 inches, then you would have 8 inches of positive ease, which would give you an oversized fit. I thought it would be nice for a different location to sit outside today, but now that I'm here, it's so noisy. The birds are loud. I think there's construction going on over there. The car's driving by, but hopefully the volume's gonna be okay for this. Hey Nerdy Knitter, Tanya here. We've got a bit of a different location today. I thought I would bring my knitting and sit outside while we have our knit and chat this month. And this month it's all about ease. Ease for sweaters, ease for socks and hats and mittens and gloves. All the times where you would want ease. We'll define it as well. And well, there are times you don't actually need it. When you knit a shawl, ease doesn't matter, it can fit anybody. But when it's a garment that needs to fit a particular part of your body, like your body or your hands or your head, then you need to think about the ease that you want with that garment. Let's start by defining what ease actually is. All it is in simple terms is the amount of space between whatever that garment is, whether it's a sweater, a mitten, a hat, or a sock, and the amount of space between that garment and your body. So you can have positive ease, where the garment is bigger than the body. Like say you have like an oversized sweater, then that is bigger than your body. Let's say you have a very close-fitting camisole that if you took it off and you just laid it on the bed and looked at it, it's actually smaller than your body. That would be negative ease, because the garment itself, the circumference of the garment or the width of the garment is smaller than the body part that it's supposed to fit over. And you can also have no ease, where the garment or the sock or hat or whatever is the exact same size as the circumference or the width of that particular part of your body. So that's all it is. It's just the amount of space between the garment, whether that's a sock, a sweater, a hat, the amount of space between that and your body. So your head or your hand or your foot or your torso. So that's really all it is. It's not some big technical thing. It's just how big is it compared to that part of your body. So we're going to dive into looking at like how much ease you would want for different types of garments, including sweaters. The majority of what we'll talk about will be sweaters, but you do have to think about ease in garments for other types of garments as well, like hats and mittens and gloves and socks. And one that I didn't end up touching on in this video because people knit them, but I don't think they're as popular, would be like shorts and pants and skirts. But you also have to think about ease with those garments, more about the ease around your hips and your waist as well. And most likely, in most cases, for things like that, you're going to want some negative ease or like no ease at the waist or wherever location where that garment, those shorts or skirt or whatever, has to stay on. So a little bit of negative ease to make it fit that area. And then it's going to vary after that through your butt and your hips or whatever. You might want it like more form fitting with negative ease or more loose fitting with some positive ease. But to have it stay in place, you do want to think about negative ease. But that's all I'm going to say about shorts and pants and skirts. They're not as popular to knit. I mean, people still knit them. I've never knit them. I don't know if I ever will, maybe someday. But we're going to dive into all of the other garments though. So the first garment I want to talk about is socks. In general, you want socks to have negative ease. You want them to be smaller than your foot so they'll stay in place. If they're bigger than your foot, they're going to flop around, fall off, slide down into your shoes, and just cause you all kinds of issues. Of course, slippers would be different. Generally, you want them to either like be the same size or slightly larger, depending on if you wear socks underneath or inside them before you put your slippers on. But for socks in general, negative ease. And 10% is the average. So if you're not sure how to figure that out, you would measure either around the ball of your foot, like the widest point on your foot, or around your ankle. Most people, that's going to be the same measurement. So you would take that, multiply that by 10% on a calculator. That's going to give you an amount, inches or centimeters, however you took that measurement, and that's going to be the amount you take away from the circumference of that sock to give you that 10% of negative ease. Most knitting patterns will already have this spelled out. They will say like for a circumference of 9.5 inches, your sock is going to be a circumference of, I'm just going to say 8.5 inches. I think it's usually about an inch, but the pattern will tell you and specify that it has negative ease built in, so it will fit. Now, if you're one of those people where you take that measurement around the ankle and around the ball of the foot and they're very different measurements, then that is when you might want to consider knitting a Franken sock. Like you'd knit following the instructions for one size for around the ankle, but then when you get past like your heel shaping, you're going to decrease or increase depending on the ball of foot to a different size. But in most standard fit issues, then like that, the ball of the foot and the ankle are about the same size, but not everybody is built that way. So if you have differences, then you might have to do some sort of a Franken sock. But in most cases, you're going to want about 10% negative ease, so the sock is going to stay in place. Now, there are some exceptions. If you are doing stranded knitting, it doesn't stretch like regular knitting. Like this is just a simple waffle rib, so it's nice and stretchy, so it can move over your foot, but then it sort of squishes back in place to hold its shape. Even stockinette is nice and stretchy, like all of those, you know, sort of stitch patterns will stretch enough. But when it comes to stranded knitting, it doesn't stretch like that because you have those floats of the different colors on the back. So that you want to actually have it be the same size as the circumference of your foot. Not bigger, not smaller, not negative ease, not positive ease, but generally the same size, and that should fit just fine. And the same goes for lots of cables. If there's like one or two small cables, you shouldn't see much of an issue, but if you have lots of cables all over that sock, that's going to make it pull in a lot more, and it's not going to stretch as much because those cable crossings pull that fabric in. So you probably want to get closer to the just no ease, about the same size as your actual foot. With cables, it's a bit harder to judge because there's so many different types. You can have just a few and that shouldn't affect too much, but if you have lots of cables going on, then you might want to think about less negative ease. Then we have hats, and hats can vary depending on the type of hat you're knitting. In general, 10 to 15% negative ease around like the circumference of your head, where it's going to fit your head. If it's bigger than your head, it's going to fall down into your face. So you want to have a little negative ease to hold it into place. So about 10 to 15% is what most hat patterns will have you do around, you know, that part of your head. When you measure around here, you want about 10 to 15%. And of course, different stitch patterns can affect that. Like this is knit in a 1x1 rib, so it's very stretchy. So I could knit it at maybe even a tighter gauge or a smaller size, but it will still fit because it stretches so much. So it might have maybe even more like 20% negative ease, but in general, 10 to 15% negative ease, so it stays on your head. Now the rest of the hat, it varies. You could have like a really close fitting beanie that's going to have negative ease throughout the rest of the hat, or something like this where it's a 1x1 rib. It's pretty close to the rest of like the shape of your head until you get to the top, then it sort of all bunches up. Or if it's a more loose fitting hat, then it could have some positive ease through the rest of the hat, but you don't want any positive ease through the actual brim where it's going to sit on your head. It's going to stay in place. An exception to this might be a tam. Tams are a little bit tighter, or can be a little tighter at the brim, up to even like 20% at the brim, because then after the brim, you're increasing a lot of stitches to get that really full crown and body of the hat. So in general, hats 10 to 15, tams can go up to 20% negative ease, so they'll stay in place on your head. And then the crown and the body of the hat, it can vary. It can have negative ease, where it's very close fitting beanie, or it can be like a tam and have a lot of positive ease and really a lot of space between your head and the rest of the hat. Now again, in this case as well, you want to think of stitch patterns. If you've got stranded knitting or cables along the brim of the hat, then that can make things a little tighter as well and pull it in even more. So you're going to want to swatch or just take careful measurements to see how that affects your gauge. You could even go down to like maybe 5%, but you're still going to want some negative ease to hold that hat into place. But even with cabled hats, a lot of the time that you just see like a rib brim, and that is totally fine. The cables will affect the rest of the hat, but most likely the designer has taken that into consideration when they've designed it anyway. So then we have mittens and gloves and fingerless gloves. Now for these, you need to measure around the circumference of your hand right here. And you want to know that measurement because for each of these, it's going to vary a little bit. So for fingerless mitts, then you want that to fit You don't want it to be too big. You don't want it to be bigger than your hand. You want either the same, you want it to be the circumference to be the same size as your hand or a little bit smaller, so a little negative ease so it stays in place. It's a little big right here, but it fits. This glove just fits around my hand without any positive ease. It just, I mean, I can pull it because it's rib and it's a little stretchy, but it basically is the same circumference as my hand. I could have probably knit a size smaller and it would have been a little smaller than my hand, and that would be fine too. So let's say maybe about 5%. It's not hard and fast, but for fingerless mitts, you want them to stay in place. So you want them to have either no ease or a little bit of negative ease. Now for mittens, it's the opposite. You need a little bit of wiggle room in there. So you either want no ease again, so it's just the size of your hand, or a little bit of positive ease so you can move. So if I pinch this, I do have a bit of positive ease right there. It could be the stretch as well, because stockinette fabric stretches. So it's about the size of my hand, a little bit of positive ease in there though. Again, maybe 5%, not very much. Pretty much the same size as your hand, depending on how you like your mittens to fit. If you like them bigger, then you want a little bit of positive ease. Now, gloves are closer to fingerless mitts. You want them to pretty much be the size of your hand. You don't want the fingers on your gloves to be super floppy and oversized. So more in the realm of same size as your hand, or maybe just slightly smaller, so it will fit and stay in place. So a little bit of negative ease is good for gloves as well. And now we get into the big topic of sweaters. So with all of those different hats and gloves and things like that, where there are guidelines about how much ease you want, with some exceptions for stranded knitting and stuff like that. But in general, you know, you want like some negative ease so things will stay in place. Or in the case of mittens, you want a little bit of positive ease. With sweaters, all that goes out the window because you can decide how much ease you want for your garment. Now, when it comes to the amount of ease in a garment, the place to start is a Craft Yarn Council and their chart that tells you like what kind of fit you get with the amount of ease. I'm going to put it on the screen right now. Now, as you look at this chart and you're looking at your measurements, you want to measure around the fullest part of your bust or your chest. And that is generally what you're measuring when you look at sweater patterns. So we have very close fitting or negative ease, where the circumference of the garment is smaller. It's 2 to 4 inches less than your actual bust or chest measurement. Close fitting or zero ease is body skimming. It's pretty much the same size as your bust or chest measurement. Then the classic fit, some positive ease, that is approximately 2 to 4 inches more than your bust or chest. Then a loose fit bumps that up 4 to 6 inches more than your actual bust or chest. And then we have the oversized generous, which is 6 inches and more, which seems to be very popular. You'll find lots of sweater patterns that have 6 inches or more positive ease. Knitting pattern measurements always start with either the full bust or the full chest measurement, and that works for most people. If you're an average B or C cup, which means you're about 2 inches or 3 inches difference between your upper bust, which you measure at the underarm all the way around. If you're about 2 to 3 inches different from your full bust, then the average knitting pattern will work just fine for you. If you're outside that norm, then it's better to use that upper bust measurement as a starting place when choosing your pattern, because you want it to fit through your shoulders, no matter if it's going to be oversized everywhere else. If it's too oversized here, then it just is going to end up looking more sloppy. So I do have a video about bust shaping, which is something you might want to explore if you fall outside that average B or C cup, like I do. It's better for me to measure here and then make some adjustments for my full bust. Same if you're very broad-shouldered. Sometimes that variance, like your bust circumference, has nothing to do with your shoulders. That's more of like the frame, your skeletal frame. But this upper bust measurement is more proportional and related to that measurement as well. So use the standard, and the ease standards. That's a good foundation for the average body, but we're all different and we have to think about our knitting a little bit differently if we have broad shoulders or a larger bust. But let's look at a few patterns to see what this looks like in action, these different amounts of ease. So I've pulled up 4 different Andrea Mowry patterns with different amounts of ease, so you can see how much ease fits within a garment and how that looks on a body. So first we have her So Faded. This one has negative ease or no ease. It's pretty much, when you look at the point of her bust, pretty much the same size as her at that point. Then we have Sprite, and the pattern description says this has 1 inch of positive ease. So now we're moving a little bit closer to that classic fit, which is 2 to 4 inches of positive ease. You can see when you look at her full bust point, the sweater is larger than her at that point. Then we have Nurtured, and the pattern description said that she's wearing this with 6 inches of positive ease. So we're getting to that higher end of a loose fit, and you can see with her arms at her sides that, or out at the sides, that the sweater is larger than her at her full bust. And we have the Weekender, and according to the pattern description for this one, she's wearing it with 10 inches of positive ease. So we're definitely in that oversized fit category, which is over 6 inches. So you can see by looking at it that it's definitely larger than her body. So all of those sweaters show you like the different amounts of ease that you can have. But then when you look at a particular knitting pattern, it's going to probably give you a recommended amount of ease. It'll tell you to pick a size based on your full bust circumference plus the amount of ease that they recommend. But you don't have to always choose a size based on the recommended ease. You can choose based on the amount of ease that you want. Now, those pictures we just looked at, that can give you like a starting place of how it would look depending on the amount of ease in that garment. But if a pattern tells you like it recommends 12 inches of positive ease on your body, you might not like that much ease. You might want it to be a little less positive ease, and that is totally fine. It's your sweater. You don't have to follow exactly what the pattern tells you to. You can knit it the way you want it to fit your body. Now, one very popular pattern is the Ranunculus, and if we just scroll right through, I'm going to scroll quickly through this page on Ravelry, you can see that all of these sweaters have very different amounts of ease, and they've really customized it to fit themselves, and you can do that with your sweaters as well. Now, you could have a sweater that has a 40-inch bust circumference, and it can fit more than one body. Let's say you have a 38-inch bust. That's going to give you 2 inches of positive ease, so you fit within that classic fit category. Let's say you have a 32-inch bust. Then you've got 8 inches of positive ease. So now we're more in the oversized category. The sweater will still fit both bodies. Or let's say you have a 36-inch bust. That would give you 4 inches of positive ease. So that puts you on the higher end of the classic fit, starting to get into that loose fit. Or let's say your bust is 42 inches. So then you're going to have 2 inches of negative ease at the fullest point of the bust. So one sweater, but it can fit different bust sizes. So let's see this in action as well. We're going to go to this article on Brooklyn Tweed. They've got a few sweaters here, then they put it on different models with different bust sizes. So first we have this box pullover, this blue top. The sweater itself is 52.5 inches in circumference at the bust. Now, the first model, she has a 42-inch bust, and the second one has a 34-inch bust. So you can see 52-inch sweater, it fits 2 different bust sizes. Here's another example, this red tunic, which has a circumference of 43.75 inches. The first model, she has a 34-inch bust, and the second one has a 42-inch bust. Same sweater, 2 different bodies. Okay, so that's the first point. You can choose the amount of ease that you want for your sweater. The pattern can recommend it to you, but that doesn't mean you have to follow that amount of ease. The second point I want to make here is that the amount of ease varies depending on the sweater construction. So when I talk about sweater construction, I mean how the sleeve sits in the sweater. So you can have yoke, a circular yoke where there's no seams or anything between the sleeve and the body. Raglans where you have that slanted line using increases or decreases or seams, or a set-in sleeve where you've got like that sleeve that is shaped like my t-shirt here. There's a seam here right on the edge of my shoulder. Or drop shoulder where you might have an oversized top where that seam is like down on your bicep somewhere. It's almost like a T-shaped garment. So you're going to want different amounts of ease depending on the type of sweater construction, how those sleeves meet the body of that sweater. Here's a chart from Kim McBrien Evans for interweave that gives some good estimates, but I want you to note this is the minimum requirement for ease. You can have more ease than this, but you need at least a little bit so that sweater is going to fit properly. So for a set-in sleeve, this is where it's okay to have some negative ease and be really close fitting. But you're in that -1 to +1 inch of ease. And then for a raglan, you want to start at either about 2 to 4 inches of positive ease. Drop shoulder, we're moving up a little more, 4 to 6 inches of positive ease. And then a yoke anywhere between 2 and 6, depending on how shallow or deep that yoke is. So those are just minimums, but you need a little bit of ease through the body, basically up here so you can move. You don't want it to be so tight that you can't move your shoulders or your arms. So you need to have some ease here. So when we talk about ease in a sweater pattern, it definitely is referring to the fullest point of the bust and the chest, but it's really up here. So that upper bust measurement is still very important because you can use that as a guide to decide on the ease for this part to make sure it's going to fit you well. Now that was a lot of information about ease and how it works with different types of garments, and I hope you found that helpful. If you still have questions, then leave them down below and we can do a follow-up video if there's still topics we should have discussed. I think I covered everything, but I never know. Sometimes I miss things, and that's totally fine. We can keep discussing it. If you have any tips or advice to share on the topic of ease, then be sure to share them in the comments down below. And I love to read your comments, and they could pop up in a future video as well. Now, ease is just one part of the topic, especially when it comes to knitting sweaters and choosing the right size for your body shape and your body type. And we dive deeper into this topic in this video right here. So click right there and I'll see you in the next video.